either as high as the FDA or definitely societies to force, not force that, but strongly encourage. Kind of on the same slide too, I mentioned image enhancement takes up a relatively small piece of the pie in 2021, but that image enhancement has grown quite a bit. While there's not a ton of options out there as much as some of the other things, they're being used pretty frequently now. A lot of different institutions.
That last pie that you showed, abdomen was such a small part.
Yeah.
Do the abdominal imagers just not care about AI, or is our job just too hard for AI?
Computers know better now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think part of it is, especially with MR, it's so hard to get artifacts and things like that. I think that's why MR is very difficult, but I don't know. I mean, there's so many different organs too, where it's brain, there's the brain. I like too. So I think the complexity of different organs and things like that might be part of
I
it.
think it might be able to do, or at least lesion measurements and stuff in the liver for us.
Yeah.
There's
There's options.
nice. If I didn't have to sit there and measure everything.
Yeah, there's like some like Rano-based AI software. Okay, so I'll get started. Yes, and I was going to mention abdomen is much smaller for whatever reason, where neuro and chest basically take up 2/3 of the subspecialty AI algorithm. So other roadblocks in actual development. So this is true on both commercial and research aspect. So this is kind of the development process, kind of simplified, but you come up with the use case, hypothesis, it's specific model that you want to answer a clinical question, you plan the methods, and then you have to get the data. Well, data sharing is a huge pain, especially if you want a good data set at multiple institutions. If you're studying something that's a relatively rare pathology, it becomes even harder. So that's why there's so many applications for common things like hemorrhage, stroke, all that kind of stuff, lung nodules, and not so much for common diseases. So that's a big bottleneck. Annotation, manual annotation of large data sets takes forever. That's a big bottleneck and can be very expensive as well if you're going to pay people to do it other than just volunteers. And then external deployment validation. There's probably a whole talk I could do on external deployment and all the headaches that come with that, but you can't really just give someone an AI model and say use it. There's a lot of pipeline development and coding that has to happen in order to set that up. So one way to address the multi-institutional data set collection problem is repeat collaborations. So amendments to prior data transfer agreements and IRBs take about a tenth of the time as establishing new ones. So that's one way to do it, is kind of have a set group of collaborators and continue to collaborate in the future. Consortiums. So one that I'm working on for us to join is called Bunker Hill. So this has a consortium of all these different universities here that basically have blanket IRB agreements and blanket data sharing agreements that, as long as it meets those criteria, you can share data that same day, which obviously drastically reduces the time. Other strategies, federated learning is really great in theory. My experience in practice is it was a huge headache. So what federated learning does is, rather than sending the data all to a central institution, you send your model to train at each individual institution behind their firewall. So that way you don't really, the IRB is relatively simple. And then you don't have to establish a data transfer agreement because your data is not leaving. It doesn't even need to be anonymized in a lot of cases, just because you're just training the model. So an example of this was, there's a federated learning brain tumor segmentation model that we're participating in currently, and it was very painful to set up. So here's kind of an example of how many annotators take to annotate a data set. So this is for the RSNA AI challenge. This was about 2,400 scans. Granted, it was more complex because it was grading lumbar degen at each level and subarticular stenosis, neuroforaminal narrowing, and spinal canal stenosis. But you can see how many annotators there are. Shout out to some people that helped here. So 55 annotators at 10 to 15 hours, which probably is a underestimate of the average time it took, would be 550 to 825 hours. If you bill according to our moonlighting, that'd be over $200,000. So another solution to the annotation problem is foundation models. And I'll go into why, but basically foundation models don't require annotations. They require image and text pairs. And so for radiology, your image and text pairs can be radiology images and radiology report, and they don't actually need annotations. So foundation models have been gaining a ton of momentum, and especially in radiology, but also just globally. So this was a announcement that I saw pop up on many different sites. ChatGPT passes the radiology exam. What they don't tell you, like a lot of media hype, is that it kind of wasn't a radiology exam. It was no images, so it was words only. And nothing against Canada, but I assume this was like the ACR board exam. This was the Canadian exam. They came up with questions like the board exam, so it wasn't actually official exam or exam questions. So it performs pretty well. I guess it passed with the 69%. I'm not sure what the cutoff was, but that seems pretty low. And then it did really well with lower order recall and understanding questions, but really struggled with higher order thinking. And you can see down below, it actually broke down the questions and correct responses by subspecialty. And they scored the lowest on GI. So but you can see the range is pretty tight, and it scored pretty similarly between all the questions. I think it probably scored the highest on
Breast imaging.
It probably scored the highest on breast because they're all much more organized than us and have better.
It's cancer, it's not.
So there was a pretty famous tweet or X post, whatever they're called now, by Elon Musk recently about his new large language model, Grok. He said, try submitting X-ray, PET, MRI, and other medical images to Grok for analysis. This is early stage, but already quite accurate and will become extremely good. Let us know where Grok gets it right or needs work. So I'm going to forget this person's name. Laura Haycock from NYU. She's a AI breast radiology researcher. She gave Grok a bunch of images and asked it to interpret them. And here's the first image. She also mentioned that she picked images that she thought a high-level medical student or first-year radiology resident would have a good idea of. So this is obviously a breast MR showing some type of capsular rupture, I believe. And Grok responded, this is MRI scan of brain, specifically focusing on the ventricles and surrounding structure. It gets better. Here's an ultrasound of the breast. It thinks it's a scrotal ultrasound at 2 decibels. Granted, ultrasound can be confusing without context, but so the summary of her thoughts were Grok was okay at recognizing breast radiology image types like ultrasound, MRI, mammograms, but with some exceptions even to those. Grok was very wrong at diagnosing breast imaging, although that capability may still be locked, but they kind of posted later that it wasn't. And then she did like the explanations. That's kind of one of the nice things about large language models is they explain how they came to their conclusion. So it's not very black boxy compared to some other solutions out there. So she said, real radiologist much greater than Grok. Here's kind of another similar result. So this was with GPT Vision 4. And so this looked at chest radiographs and they asked it a set of questions to identify pathology. You can see pulmonary infiltrate, pleural effusion, consolidation, cardiomegaly, or medical devices present. And then it had to lateralize. It ended up getting a maximum of 25% of those tests. So not great. Oops. Okay. So even with the relatively not great initial performance, it is a very prominent topic in our field. These are the top 10 most cited articles for radiology in 2024. 5 out of the 10 are based on LLMs or foundation models. In 2023, it was even more common. 5 out of the top 6 most cited articles were on LLMs. So what is a foundation model? Foundation model is basically model trained on very, very large data sets with multimodal data. it's called a foundation model because like a foundation, it serves as a building blocks to build it and fine tune it into other applications. It can a lot of times be used pretty much what's called zero shot or just kind of as is, but the idea is to fine tune it to your purposes. And they mostly rely on a transformer architecture, which I'll talk about very briefly, just what the strengths of a transformer architecture are, rather than getting into any technical details. Those are a bunch of examples of some of the most popular foundation models currently. So here's kind of how it would apply to medicine, especially radiology, is you would have a lot of input modalities into the training, obviously imaging, all modalities preferably. And then you'd also have things like the radiology report, but also clinical notes, textbook, medical lectures, and then, literature. And then you can also, people have also looked at inputting like genomic data, sensors, so like wearable sensors and things like that, pathology, and then patient demographics. And so that kind of it gets associated with a certain patient, and then it develops a foundation model. Again, not going to go into any technical details, but so what happens is it's a self-supervised process. So you don't have to give it annotated data. You don't have to really self-correct it, although they usually do afterwards. But for the initial training of the foundation model, you don't have to. And then it develops these emergent capabilities, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this adaptation part is where you fine tune it to specifically do what you want to do. For example, radiology report generation, diagnostic support, and many other things, which I'll talk about. So an example I saw to kind of explain how foundation model fine tuning works is you start with something like a plain vanilla cake. And you can make a lot of different cakes from that plain vanilla cake by specifically repurposing it to what you want to do. You can make it a birthday cake or a wedding cake. And obviously those will function much better for its intended purposes than the plain vanilla cake. So the scale, to understand like how big these foundation models are, the parameters range in billions to trillions for the number of trained parameters. ChatGPT 4.0 costs greater than $100 million to train. And most of that was actually like hardware costs, not actually staff costs or people's salaries. A large chunk of it was, the majority of it was technical. And then over 10,000 A100 GPUs were used to train it. So just for people that aren't familiar with GPUs, A100 GPU is this, and it costs $8,000 to $25,000 a piece, depending on how much memory it has. And early small radiology models are much smaller scale, but still require about greater than 1 million exams. There's one I'm going to talk about later that's tens of thousands. So the emerging abilities are what you get unexpected kind of skills that the foundation model develops that you didn't train it to do. You just gave it a bunch of data and it kind of develops all these skills on its own. So examples are creativity. So ChatGPT can write haikus, it can write poetry, it can do all sorts of things like that, which they obviously didn't train it to do. It can summarize text, and then it actually, there's been some evidence that has some ethical and bias sensitivity that they didn't have to train into the model. So some of the additional vocabulary terms as we go along. So large language models. So large language models are foundation models. Foundation models kind of like the broader scope of it, but they deal specifically with text data and they generate human language. So ChatGPT is a good example of a large language model. So tasks it does text generation. It's really great with translation, translating between languages, summarization, question answering. And then you can use it for images, but it has to process it a different way. It uses an image encoder to take that image and transfer it to numerical representations, but you can use that as well, even though it's technically not what it was used to train it. So again, some examples: ChatGPT, Llama, Bard. Vision language models is an AI model trained on vast amounts of text and imaging data, usually with text and image pairs. So like I said, an example would be radiology image and report. Tasks include image captioning, so it can describe the image that it's viewing. It can answer questions about an image, which is what a lot of people that are studying this early in radiology are doing. They're having kind of like a set number of questions that it'll answer about the images. And then, like I mentioned, obviously has great applications for radiology. Some examples of this, probably less less known to most people. Our CLIP is one of the biggest ones, and that's what a lot of people are using to train some of the bigger radiology models now. So that's contrastive language image pre-training. BLIP is another example, which is slightly different than CLIP, and Udiner and Flamingo, which I'm less familiar with. So transformer. A transformer is a neural network architecture that powers most foundation models. Really all you need to know is the key strengths. So it's really efficient with large data sets. I know it took like 1 million GPUs to train the data set, but it's much more efficient than other models or architectures. It's great at processing sequential data, so that's why it's really good with large text. And it uses attention to establish relationships and context in the data set. So it's really great at understanding the context. So like an example they talk about is like the bank of a river is different than like a bank which you put money in, and it can just use how it's talking about the bank in that sentence to understand the meaning of it, even though it's the same word. So a better name for these and what they originally thought about calling them is attention networks, but they thought transformer sounded cooler. So that's radiology applications of LLMs. So LLMs and clinical radiology can basically be used for every step of the radiology process. All the way from when the clinician orders the study, there's people that have made chatbots to interact with the ER physician. We get the call all the time. I don't know what to order. Chatbots can answer that for them. Radiologist protocol is definitely another one that I think is very appealing and interesting because it's a very mundane task that we have to do, but it's something that I think LLMs will be able to do very well. When the image is being prepared or being performed, foundation models are going to be used for image reconstruction as well, and I think they'll do a lot better than what we have currently. As the radiologist reports the exam, you're going to have reporting tools which are already available. And then there's a lot of patient explanations for explaining the report and also explaining what's going to happen to them, and kind of follow up for IR, like IR recommendations for after biopsies and things like that. So this was a study done evaluating the accuracy of chatbot for ACR appropriateness criteria. And they basically set up a bunch of questions that the LLM had to solve or recommend a specific type of imaging for based on the ACR appropriateness criteria. And this one in green here is what they basically took the appropriateness criteria and fine-tuned ChatGPT. And so you can see that this green box outperforms all these blue ones, which are actual radiologists and trainees. So it's not quite fair because it's learning specifically what the ACR appropriateness criteria is saying, but it is outperforming radiologists. So what I think was going to be one of the greatest uses of LLMs, and I'm looking forward to, is going into the electronic medical record, pulling out the relevant history, because you know how it is. If we get brain mass, that's kind of a lot, asking for a lot these days. So this is an example literally from yesterday when I was reading in CNC. I got the history brain mass, and this was what I ended up putting in the history as all the relevant history to the report. Right frontal astrocytoma, WHO grade 2, IDH mutant, MGMT methylated, EGFR not amplified. You can see, you can read for yourself, but he had multiple resections, multiple different types of treatment, and then currently on Avastin. So all those things matter when you're interpreting the report or interpreting the study, and all we get is brain mass. So it takes a while to pull all this out of the clinical notes.
So AI pulled all that out for you?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was saying that's what I think it'll do in the future. They actually, it's had some trouble, people trying to use it for electronic medical record summarization. They've had some trouble. I think it's because integrating with Epic creates a lot of issues. So people I've seen have some success, basically just input, they export the last clinical note from that physician and then use that. I know there's some people from Penn working on it. They haven't published anything yet, but it looked really great. So it's coming really soon. It just they haven't quite done it just yet. So this was an example study of just protocol, doing automated protocols of CTs. So this was they used ChatGPT-4, and this was not fine-tuned or anything. It was just ChatGPT-4 as is. They said, based on the patient's medical history and referring physician's questioning, please indicate the appropriate radiological study, including modality, body region, contrast, yes or no, and if yes, what contrast phases. And it actually got it perfectly right, according to what the radiologist picked in 84% of the time, which is pretty good. And this included just the breakdown of it. Head and neck was 37% of the cases, chest was 23, abdomen was 19, spine was 16, one region 5. So with report generation, I'm going to try to show this video from Rad.ai. So sorry, this is actually impression generation from findings. So this is one of the products that Rad.ai offers. And so basically the radiologist came up with that entire report in the top part, and then this was the impression that it generated automatically, which I think looks pretty good. I'm not. This is a abdomen and pelvis report. I'm not a body radiologist, but it looks pretty good to me.
Don't ask me what I think about it.
Okay, and then here's Rad.ai's version of complete report generation. So how this works is they have this Omnibox, and you dictate into it. For example, let me see what they said here. So they said patchy opacity in the right middle lobe, smaller pleural effusion, and then it goes ahead and generates the entire radiology report. And what's really great about Rad.ai and Nuance and Powers, basically copying what they did and offering a very similar solution, is they take all your personal radiology reports from your institution and label them as you as the physician or as the radiologist, and they learn the type of language that you use. So it puts it in your language too, which is really great. It's not just like a standard templated language that it uses. So I think there's variable results with this. I mean, this is a pretty simple chest report with 2 findings, but they showed some examples of it doing well in more complex reports, but I think it's still a ways away from doing really complicated studies and generating the entire report. Another good feature too is if it's a follow-up, you can say unchanged and it'll generate it in your language, not just completely copy their prior report if someone else dictated it. So there's a lot of really great time-saving features there. And so this is really cool. So let's see if I don't think the audio is going to go loud enough, unfortunately. Anyways, this is a study. I'll play the video so you can at least see what's going on. But what's happening here is this is taking the report and the images and generating an explanation in the patient's language that scrolls through the report, describes what the radiologist described, and also adds what each of those things mean. The organ renderings kind of a strange addition, but it's really great for patients, and I think patients are going to really appreciate this. Oh, and that's the other thing it does too, is it compares it to a normal study and kind of shows the difference back and forth, which is really nice. And this is all auto-generated. It's not, you just copy and paste or put in the images, put in the findings or the report, and it does it all on its own. All right, so there have been some early developments of VLM specifically for radiology purposes. So they kind of use some of the larger foundation models and use some of those features, but then really fine tune it to radiology. More so than just kind of like a simple fine tuning where you're just adding a few hundred cases at the end. They're adding like millions of cases in this example. So this is an example of I don't know if it's Check's agent is how they pronounce it. But basically it takes in chest x-rays. So you kind of just drag and drop them in there. This is an example. Hit submit, and then it auto-generates an entire report. And so how it's doing that, sorry. Stop it. So it goes through, and as I mentioned before, with foundation models and LLMs, or foundation models in general, you can ask it specific questions. Yeah, this is VLM, sorry, not LLM. you can ask VLM specific questions about the images. And so it just has each step where it says analyze airway, it asks a question to analyze the airway, analyze breathing, analyze the heart, analyze the diaphragm, and analyze anything else. And so it kind of puts those into each section as it goes through. Obviously, they're going to show the examples that turn out really well, but they did use this on a pretty large sample size. So it was trained on 8 million training samples, which included over 1 million studies. And so they used thing where they did question and then provided the answer and the images. So each study had multiple questions on it, like 5 or 6. So it wasn't 8.5 million images. But they found basically that it saved the residents a lot of time in drafting their reports. So they said residents, 41% agreed that it decreased their time. Actually, attendings, 54% agreed that it saved their time. And then attendings rating the residents' performance, 63% thought that the residents' performance for their final report was better after using the checks agent. And then this isn't just like the checks agent report and the resident not editing it at all. It's the resident starting with the checks agent report and then editing it. And so it also went down here and looked at the number or how much the residents agreed with attendings and residents agreed with the findings of the checks agent. And it's on a scale of basically -1 or -10 to 10. And so you can see the average is about 5, it ranges from 4.5 to 5.6. So right around the agree range. So it seems like it's performing pretty well. And 1.2 million compared to like ChatGPT is nothing in terms of imaging examples. So one of the kind of weaknesses of a lot of the VLMs right now is they're not able to function with 3D data. And so the same group at Stanford trained something they called Merlin, which was trained on abdominal CTs that were fed in as 3D images. And so they trained this set on 20,000 abdominal CTs. And this is a relatively new publication, so they haven't like rigorously tested it yet. But they did give it tasks such as disease prediction. So the patient was healthy and they predicted certain disease subsets. You can see there, it's like chronic kidney disease, osteoporosis, ischemic heart disease, and diabetes, hypertension. So they were able to predict a lot of those outcomes without the patient currently having those disease processes with relatively high accuracy. Yeah, there's a lot more that has to be done on this. Like I mentioned, 20,000 abdominal CTs is nothing. You'll see next, I'm talking about some of the bigger projects that are underway. So that performance will increase quite a bit in the near future. So right now, there's, at least as far as I know, there's 3 main really large foundation model projects that have either just finished or are currently being built. One is by AI Doc, which is a private company, so they don't actually share the foundation model with anyone. They use it for their own development, for their own algorithms. And so they train this on 20 to 30 million CTs of the chest or abdomen and pelvis. And they told us that their model training decreased from about 6 to 12 months to 2 to 3 weeks using the foundation model that they developed. So no one will get to use it, but they're rapidly producing new models using it. Hopper is another company. They trained a foundation model based on 120 million studies. Mostly were radiographs. They do have some CTs. And what they do is they offer this service where institutions are able to buy from them and they fine tune it specifically for a specific role at their institution. They pay you per API use of that model that you. So it's kind of like you pay afterwards while you're processing it. And I think you can use it for research too, but I think people are mostly using it for streamlining their processes. And then Bunker Hill is a little bit different than the other two. So Bunker Hill is a commercial company, but they're developing a VLM based on all imaging modalities. So what they're doing is having institutions join their consortium and basically handing over their entire imaging database. And right now they're on scale for their version 1 to be trained this year, hopefully spring or summer, and it'll be greater than 100 million studies. And so how their model works is that if you're one of the sites that contribute at least 5 million studies to the training of this foundation model, you get to use it exclusively, so other people outside don't get to use it. And for free, the cost comes that down the road, if you develop a commercial software, they get a third of the profits from that software that's built down the road. But they also help you with development and all. So that's what's out there now. So this is a kind of example of Hopper that they gave, how it's functioning. You can fine tune it for chest x-rays and ask it specific questions, and it outputs yes or no. Then they can tie those outputs with your radiology. All right, I don't have too much time. I'll try to close through this last little part real quick. So LLMs could be used as virtual research assistants, which are great. Rather than talk about these parts, I'll just kind of show you one example that was published. So this is a busy slide, but really, if you look at the input this is ChatGPT-4 with an additional add-on that they have available that's in like beta testing right now. But basically what they did is they inputted a Excel spreadsheet containing a bunch of data from their research project and said, can you perform some preliminary analysis and visualization? Consider Gleason 7, it's a prostate cancer study, Gleason 7 or above to be clinically significant prostate cancer, and look at the relationship between PIRAD score and clinically significant prostate cancer. Basically, it prompted itself through all these processes and spit out these graphs in the end to compare Gleason score with outcomes. So pretty impressive that that's the only prompt you had to do and give it a spreadsheet. And on top of that, it's able to actually do some cleaning of the data too, and clean out some of the kind of noise of the data.
Do they do statistics?
Yeah, I can do statistics too. Yeah. So current limitations, foundation models are advancing at a rapid pace, and the FDA approval for each version, once it's applied to radiology, is going to have to happen. So it can't keep up with companies like OpenAI and things like that that don't need FDA approval for their products. So that's going to be kind of challenging. 3D imaging is an issue right now because all the big commercial foundation models, other than the ones for radiology, are being trained on 2D images. Validation is going to be tricky because the output can essentially be anything. So they're going to have to come up with some ways to standardize benchmarking. Hallucinations, as within ChatGPT and things like that, other LLMs are potentially going to be an issue and have to be monitored somehow, which I don't know how we're going to monitor that. And then multimodal input, while that's great to predict outcomes, it's very difficult to supervise because a radiologist can check like that measured a lung nodule correctly, but it can't incorporate all that multimodal input and see if the percent risk of cancer is correct or not. So you're kind of having to trust the BLM at that point. And just really briefly, I'll touch on this too. So going forward, we kind of need to get ahead of this and think about its impact on radiology education. So things like report generating software, you need to think about when is it okay to allow residents and fellows to be able to generate their entire report, because developing a report is a necessary skill as a radiologist, at least for now. Case generation for teaching, coming up with teaching files. You can generate 1,000 cases of a GBM if you wanted to, and it'll probably look very realistic. So there's kind of good and bad. It's not a real case, but it's probably going to look like the real thing. So there's challenges to consider with that. Search patterns, if AI is detecting all the abnormalities for us, residents and fellows might struggle in developing their search patterns. And then relying on LLMs for knowledge. It's a great way to summarize articles and things like that, but there are hallucinations, like embedded black pearls in these summaries that you're getting. All right, so I think I'm out of time. I'll skip that for now. If anyone, these are some really great articles that I found, and looking through these things, and a link to the checks agent, which is really cool. So these are some articles that if you really want to learn more, there's a lot more technical details in these articles than I discussed. And finally, I wanted to talk about, we're going to work with Dr. Minashima to start a Radiology AI Research Center. So anyone that would be willing to be interested in kind of collaborating with us for that would be great. Kind of the idea is to have some set resources available. So people that can do biostats, people that can do coding, that would be available to especially help with preliminary data to get some of these projects launched. And then you can apply for extramural funding. And then also just kind of advising and making you aware of any potential resources that are available, such as annotation tools and things like that. So we're really excited about this.
Seems like it's shallow salt.
Yeah, I know. That was generated. That was
It's the
generated.
Great Salt Lake, shallow.
Great picture.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Who bears the brunt of the cost of implementing clinically available AI? Like, does insurance pay for it? Do we bill patients? Does the institution bear the brunt of that cost?
Mostly institution. I mean, I think some of them are reimbursed now. I believe CT perfusion is one where there's a billing code for our automated CT perfusion. I think we bill for NeuroQuant too, right?
But billing, yeah, we can bill for it. Doesn't mean it get reimbursed. So the CPT code allow us to bill how often we get paid, or how much we get paid, depend on the, payer mix and everything else. So it's not huge amount, but there is a billable code for NeuroQuant. Yeah, so it's a CPT.
No one here obviously does this, but people in lots of industries will take or PowerPoint, clean it up, running it through one of the large language models, bouncing it back and then dropping it back in. But what a lot of people don't realize is when you do that, what you don't think is HIPAA actually is HIPAA, because if the data set becomes available, you can actually track and break the line on a study, just like you can reconstruct a face from somebody's MRI scan on research patients. But I think being very proactive about our data security is really important, because as we move forward, if you just take your report, drop it into your laptop, run it through a sandboxed version of a large language model, and then bring it back in, your data's been out there for a while. And that characteristic pattern of presidential adenoma patient has X, Y, and Z findings could be backtrackable. Just like it's something as a department we should continue to keep saying. Yeah.
Question. So you've now done 3 of these RSNH AI challenges. What's been the biggest lesson you've learned?
I mean, getting the data is always the biggest time commitment for us, and we're always behind schedule on that. So for us, kind of to make that more efficient, like I said earlier, collaborating with the same people has been helpful. We kind of have like the set people that collaborate each year. There's some new people each time, but the new people take, I don't know, 10 times as long to get the data to us. So yeah, it's really tricky that way. Having a good way for data transfer is key too, which that's kind of something I think would be a great thing to set up within the AI Research Center, is having a standardized way of safely transferring data between institutions. For RSNA, we used a cloud platform that's not paid by RSNA. It's free for them, but it's pretty expensive if you do it on your own, MDAI, which is great because it allows you to annotate directly on that platform too, but it is expensive. And I think there's probably more repeatable ways to do it once you set it up. It's a tough challenge for sure. Yeah.
This is super recent, so I don't know if we're aware, but obviously DeepSeek is like a hot topic, and how cheap they were able to do the same sort of stuff for. Has that chatter made its way into the medical AI community yet?
I haven't talked to the people that are the people I talk to the most that are building foundation models are at Bunker Hill, and I've talked some to Hopper too. Yeah, I'm sure as they advance the field, they'll come up with cheaper and cheaper ways, because I mean, it directly affects their bottom dollar, right? So I'm sure they'll make ways of being more efficient. I do know that the one Merlin one I talked about that Stanford trained, they were able to do, it was like 20 to 30,000 abdominal CTs and train a model, and it just took like a day on a single GPU. So that was pretty efficient too. The guy that's doing the research there is brilliant. His name's Akshay Chowdhury, and he's basically has the 2 most popular like BLMs for research purposes in radiology. So I'd imagine he probably experimented between the 2 and made it more efficient. But yeah, I haven't heard specifically.
Can you comment on the AI hallucination the AI can generate the findings that is not existing. So
Yeah.
How do we do this?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question for sure. Yeah, I don't know that there's a great way. I mean, I think having, because in radiology, we're probably going to test, right? We're not, it's not like ChatGPT where people can ask you the craziest questions. We're gonna probably ask it to find specific pathologies or like the chest X-ray examples, like please analyze the lungs, please analyze the heart, please do all that. So I think there could be standardized data sets, like I mentioned before, having like a bake-off type thing where you're testing each of the models on that data set and you know what the answers are. And so then you can easily track like how many times it's hallucinating, things like that. I think with finding pathology though, that's a little bit more easier to solve because we can look at the images and tell it's wrong. Where I think it's a little trickier when you have that multimodal input view and it's predicting something that you can't see. That's where it becomes really tricky that to know. And I mean, there's inherent biases in that too, like potentially racial discrepancies and things like that. So that one becomes a much harder issue to answer once it's guiding treatment rather than just detecting things. All right, I think I've sufficiently gone over. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Highlight's gonna be the Magnolia